Hi, I'm Elisa, and welcome back. So we are starting the nervous system, and so I just wanted to go over a brief introduction of the nervous system. So for starters, the nervous system is very complex. There's going to be a lot of our conscious behavior, experience, personality, because it's sensing the world around us. So the study of neurobiology is something that we combine behavioral, such as psychology, with life sciences, like biology. And so we're going to look a little bit about how that's connected. So some of the things I expect you to be able to understand is to be able to describe the function of the nervous system and its parts. And speaking of its parts, if you describe the major anatomical and the functional subdivisions, we got a nice flow chart for you there. So a general overview of the nervous system. There's going to be a message base. And so this message base, I want you to kind of think of as the mail, right? So there's a fast one and a slow one. The fast one is the nervous system proper. The slow one is going to be the endocrine system. That's more of a long-term chemical, such as hormones, right? That would be secreted into the blood. So the nervous system is a little different because it uses electric-like and also a different type of chemical means. But it's that quickness of the electric-like signaling that gives the nervous system its placement as being kind of the email instead of the snail mail, like the endocrine system of the body. So the nervous system is going to carry out its task in a couple steps. Number one, we've got to sense whatever it is that's around us, right? So that information can come at us through lots of different receptors, chemoreceptors, mechanoreceptors, different types of neurons that help us process and sense or be able to take up information about not only the environment or what's outside of the body, but also the environment within the body itself. It kind of tells us a little bit about how we're doing, what kind of changes we need to make in order to maintain homeostasis, for example. It's a way we transmit these codes. And specifically, we're going to look at two divisions of the nervous system, the central nervous system, the CNS, boop, and also the peripheral nervous system, which we'll get to in a minute. The central nervous system is more of the big processor. So it takes the information it receives from the afferent, usually the peripheral nervous system, and it processes it. It takes past experiences or what we've learned already, and it helps us figure out what we need to do. Also, the central nervous system is responsible for coordinating some of the responses to, say, the muscles or a gland that needs to secrete adrenaline if we needed to run. So going back to those ideas of the two main subdivisions, the central nervous system, which we just talked about a little bit, is just going to be composed of the brain and the spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system means it's on the outside of that. So if you have the brain, the spinal cord here, everything that would go from your arms to your legs and the rest of the parts of your body, that's the peripheral nervous system, for example. So it's kind of a lot of stuff. It's actually everything except the brain and the spinal cord. It is composed of nerves and special units called ganglia, which we'll look at in a minute. So a nerve is a bundle of nerve fibers. It's actually a whole bunch of these nerve fibers that are wrapped together, kind of like cars on a freeway, that are going to a very specific part of the body or moving away from it. It's also wrapped in a fibrous connective tissue, which helps to protect it, but also to amplify or in some cases slow down the signal. The ganglion are these swellings, right? And so what these little collective points are where these neuron cell bodies are located. Let's look a little more at the peripheral nervous system. It contains the sensory and the motor division. So it takes the signals coming in, and then after it takes them in, it takes them to the central nervous system. And the central nervous system is going to decide what to do about it. And these interneurons, which we'll talk about later, are going to send signals, oftentimes to a motor division, which is going to cause an output. Like if you sense there's a really hot cup of coffee and it might burn your fingers, it's going to take that information into your interneurons or your CNS, And it's going to give an output like maybe I should put down the cup of coffee, or maybe I should pull my hand away from that hot thing. So the sensory is the afferent because you are affected by something in your environment or a condition of your body. Again, it carries the signals from the receptors, and the receptors are the receivers, right? They're the actual contact points to the central nervous system. The central nervous system thinks about it. Interneurons are there. So the somatic sensory division carries these signals from these receptors, right? These receiving points, such as like the skin, bones, muscles, joints, wherever it is in the body. And then the visceral sensory division is going to be carrying it from the viscera. So these are your heart, lungs, stomach, everything that's a lot of abdominal and thoracic cavity stuff. So here we have things that might be moving or in contact with the outside world. And then here we have things that are maybe processing food or helping us keep our chemistry succinct. The motor or efferent, or the one division that has an effect, is going to carry signals from that central nervous system or the brain to effectors, right? So something that's going to go out there and cause an effect, right? So cause and effect. So these can cause glands to secrete or muscles to move. It's your response, basically. So the somatic motor division, again, is going to carry signals to skeletal muscles. So outputs, or some of the things it does, are going to be muscle contraction, for example. And sometimes these are going to be also involuntary muscle contractions, like the somatic reflexes. We talked also about the visceral motor division. Well, we call these component the autonomic nervous system, or some people think of it as like an automatic type nervous system. It's pretty quick. It carries signals to things like glands, cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and helps us with things like flight or fight. So it's involuntary. And so when we have these involuntary responses, we consider these also a type of visceral reflex. So the visceral motor division, or the autonomic, somewhat kind of automatic in a way, nervous system, is even divided a little more. So that's the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system divisions. So the sympathetic is about excitement. It's kind of the yang of it all. So it's going to arouse the body, wake you up, get you ready for action. Things like breathing and heartbeat jump up. Things like digestion and having to use the restroom tend to go down. Parasympathetic division slows things down, gets you ready for bed and rest. It has a calming effect. Your heart rate's going to slow down, your breathing becomes calmer. It also allows you to start digesting. Since we're going to rest, let's digest. So I just wanted to go over this figure real quick of the divisions of the system. So firstly, central nervous system, shown here in purple. Only going to find it right here in the brain, and then going down this portion of the spine, right? And as you can see, this peripheral nervous system is everything else. It's got a lot of branches, and there's a lot of inputs and outputs going everywhere. So concentrated central nervous system and disseminated peripheral. Now I know we just talked about the subdivisions of the nervous system, but sometimes this flowchart helps people a little bit. So one thing to think of is the central nervous system, it's a lot smaller. There's less divisions, so there's going to be less divisions. Only two, brain and spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system divide more by concept and place. So two things at once. Things like information going in and information going out. Information that's coming in from, say, your organs, like I'm hungry or I need some more water. Or somatic sensory, like ouch, that coffee's pretty hot. Motor outputs are going to go in two ways. Visceral motor division, squeeze glands, let's get that adrenaline out. Or somatic motor division, like let's get up and run. And then that visceral motor division has something else that it has to worry about. It has to worry about being up and ready to go and bringing things down a few notches, right? Rest and digest. So the sympathetic and the parasympathetic divisions. All right, lots of complexity. Hopefully that flowchart will help you remember a little bit. So getting you ready, let's talk about some of the properties of neurons, things that make them special or different from other cells. So things I would like you to look at in this upcoming video is going to be the 3 functional properties found in all neurons. There's also going to be a couple of categories of neurons. They're specialists, so they do special jobs. We're going to look at what's inside their bodies and what they're made of, basically the cell biology, things like nucleus and mitochondria and all that. And then one thing that's pretty important is we need to talk about the parts of a neuron that are going to transport things like signals or chemicals used for those signals. Some general and universal properties of neurons, things that we can always hopefully depend on them to be able to do. Hopefully, they're going to get excited at some point, not all the time, but every once in a while. That means they're in a communication circuit. They're responding to environmental changes. Now remember, environmental change can be inside or outside. They need to have this very interesting property of conductivity. They produce electrical or electric-like signals that travel along these nerve fibers. Think of them as giant fiber optic cables throughout the body. And we're going to talk about those a little bit more. Those nerve fibers are made of axons. And so those are going to communicate at distant locations with other cells. The other thing they have to do is they have to secrete. And so what a secretion really means is you have a cell and it has to make and produce something like maybe a chemical that it pushes out into the environment. It has an impact there. So for example, at the end of a nerve fiber, you might have, say, acetylcholine to talk to muscles. So that would be something that's secreted. That's a neurotransmitter, actually. So functional classes of neurons. We talked about these a little bit. So those that are affected, sensory, right? So they have been affected by a condition. They detect things, stimuli. They bring information towards the brain and the spinal cord. Interneurons, which are a lot in the central nervous system. Actually, it's entirely within the central nervous system. It's the point that connects both motor and sensory pathways. Sometimes you just need one interneuron to make a decision. Other times, you got to rattle it around your brain, and there could be a lot more than that. So, since there's so much information to process, it ends up being that about 90% of all your neurons are these interneurons. So they're receiving the signals from sensory, and they're carrying out functions such as thinking about them. That's what we mean by integrative. We're integrating experiences from the past, for example, things we've learned about, or things we know about other parts of the body or a system, or that might be important in making that decision for the response. And lastly, we talked already about motor or efferent neurons, the ones who will have an effect. So after we've processed this information in the central nervous system or in the interneuron, a signal is decidedly sent out to a motor neuron, and something is decided to effect. So these often go to things like muscles or gland cells, causing us to secrete, again, something maybe like adrenaline, helping us to start running with all those skeletal muscles. Okay, that pretty much does it. So go ahead and give yourself a chance to take a look at things like the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Be aware of sensory or afferent neurons and how those informational pathways are brought into interneurons, primarily part of the central nervous system, right? 90% of all your neurons. And after you think about it for a little bit and rattle it around, that signal is sent back out to your motor or efferent neurons. And something's going to happen, such as muscles move or glands secrete, for example. Okay, I hope that was helpful. Bye for now.